Sean.
Marco.
We are here to deliver a message from the RSA conference team.
It's an important message from our friends. RSA Conference 2025, just around the corner, where insights drive action, solutions emerge, and community connections spark innovation. You'll be there. I'll be there. We invite everybody else to be there April 28th through May 1st. You can secure your spot at rsaconference.com/ITSPMAG25. That's ITSPMAG25. See you all there.
I'll be there. See you there.
And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining Cybersecurity. This is Sean Martin, your host, where if you listen to the show, you know I get to talk to all kinds of cool people about cool topics and how we can help organizations better protect the systems and information that make the business run so that we can actually generate some revenue and then protect that revenue as well. And there's no lack of technology available to help us with that as business leaders, making decisions on which ones best fit our industry, our environment, and our risk appetite is always a difficult one. And there are certainly no lack of claims in terms of what's possible with these technologies. And specifically looking at attacks and responses to those attacks, MITRE tries to do a good job of providing organizations a view of what that looks like. What are the techniques, tactics, and procedures of the bad actors, and how do organizations identify that stuff? So I'm probably butchering this intro, but let me get to the real joy here, which is welcoming Allie Mellen to the show. Allie, it's good to see you again.
Thank you. It's so good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
It's always a good chat with you. And when I saw this post fly by on LinkedIn, I was like, I miss chatting with Allie. This looks like a great topic. We're going to look at the Ingenuity evaluations and what that means. You and your team, Allie, do analysis of the analysis, I say. And so we're going to dig into some of that and what it means for folks. Quick word from you, who you are, what you've been up to lately at Forrester for folks who haven't met you and haven't heard from you in a bit.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Allie Mellen. I'm a principal analyst on the security and risk team at Forrester. I've been with Forrester for a little over 4 years now, and I cover security operations. So people, process, technology in the SOC. That includes EDR, XDR, SIMs, or security analytics, and detection engineering. And then I also cover, as a part of that, though a smaller component, nation state threats and AI and its use in security tools. I basically do a ton of research into these areas, and then I advise our CISO clients, which are Fortune 500, on their detection and response strategies. And then I go back and do more research. And that's my job. My background is in computer engineering. I was a computer engineer before becoming a hacker and then becoming a security practitioner. So I've seen this gig from a few different angles, to say the least.
Seen it from many angles, and you get to the continuous loop of research, analysis, reporting, guidance, and all back through it. Let's get into it. I was thinking maybe we start with what is the MITRE ATT&CK Ingenuity Evaluations. I think most people drop the Ingenuity one because I can't really say it, but I think that's just how it's referred to. But do you think it makes sense to maybe give like a two-second description of MITRE ATT&CK in the first place for folks who aren't familiar with that? Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. The MITRE ATT&CK overall is a framework that is meant to provide the typical tactics, techniques, and procedures that different threat actors use. And they get very specific into specific APT groups, and they have their whole framework for describing what those TTPs are and how they operate, and then also how to better defend against them. It's been used in many security tools to help with alignment around things like detection coverage and how we're detecting things and why. It's also an incredibly useful tool for threat hunting and for purple teaming to be able to communicate in a common language about the attacks that we're seeing. Now, MITRE also, as kind of honestly, kind of like a related output of the framework, does a series of tests called, okay, let's see if I can do it, the MITRE Ingenuity Attack Evaluations. There we go.
Woohoo.
And they have a variety of these. They have one that's the enterprise evaluations, which is what I frequently analyze. And then they also have the services evaluation as well, which is really interesting. And my colleague looks at that, Jeff Pollard. And so what these do is basically let's emulate a series of steps of attacker activity and see how each different security tool performs in order to not only have visibility into the steps and whether or not they can see the steps taking place, but also how do they actually alert on them? What does it look like when they alert on them? This has been going on for many years. I believe this is their 6th round of evaluations, which is pretty wild. I remember when they first started and it really hit the scene and was incredibly popular, especially among EDR providers. And it stayed that way for the last 6 rounds. And what's so valuable about it really is that it gives us such a clearer view of what exactly tools are able to see, which for many teams has been historically a pretty black box, to be honest. It can be very difficult to know why something is detecting, what it's seeing, and what that means for them. And MITRE ATT&CK has been able to give that to practitioners. In addition, it also helps to improve the tools. It has a step to do a configuration change so that you can do detection better. And that can then be, if it's appropriate, brought back into the tools themselves to improve the detection quality. So there's a couple of different angles where the tests really come in handy.
And I remember, I don't know how many years ago now, it's got to be 5 or 6 years as well. Katie Nichols, when she was there at MITRE, and Fred Wilmot, who was with Splunk at the time, the 3 of us had a good chat about what this all means and the application of the framework and whatnot within organizations. You could see the swell of uptick and uptake, if you will, of the framework by solution providers, which then make claims that they could do certain things with the framework, obviously with the goal of helping organizations. But I presume that's why, because of all these claims, the analysis came to fruition. And your team's analysis of the analysis, then, what prompted you to look at this, and what was your vision for what you would do, and what were you trying to get out of taking this time, if you will?
Yeah. First off, just shout out to Katie. She's the best, and also was such a great advocate for MITRE ATT&CK. So it's a great call out. When it comes to the analysis of the analysis, as you say, there's a couple of things that we're looking to do. First off, my predecessor, Josh Salonis, actually kind of kicked off not only using the MITRE ATT&CK evaluations pretty deeply into a lot of the work that he was doing at Forrester, but also at looking at those results and trying to help make sense of them for clients. And the reason that he did this and that now I do this is because one of the things that's really beneficial about the way that MITRE presents this information, but also one of their Achilles heels in a certain way, is that they do not provide scores or rankings for any of the vendors. They provide the data, but they're not here to make a determination as to what's better than the other.
Yeah,
Now,
no winners.
no winners, yeah, which I love and I think is a huge value add for the community. I think it also can be very difficult for our clients to sift through all that data and make informed decisions about what they're seeing. And so my goal was to say, here's all this incredibly useful data. What can clients do with it? And how can I make it simple for them to internalize it and understand what they're supposed to get from it? And it's been very interesting to see how over the years, the way that we approach that has changed. In previous years, I thought about it from much more of like a zero trust angle and how do you kind of think about how this fits into your zero trust strategy. As we'll talk about a little later, this year it's much more focused around cost. And in part, that's because of market dynamics and market changes. We're seeing a lot of frustration around SIM costs, and at the same time, too many alerts coming in to end users. And so we need to address that. And MITRE ATT&CK gave us a very clear picture of what it's like to work with these tools, how many alerts they were generating, what their visibility is, and that's incredibly valuable.
Well, let's just go right there. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll ask you this first. Was there anything from previous analysis that you found helped organizations maybe get past a blocker or uncover a misconception or an assumption they were making? Basically, an opportunity to toot your own horn in terms of we provided this information and we saw a market change in how operations progressed over time. Anything you can point to?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of differences that have taken place. The first off is in the first round of evaluations that I really in depth looked at. We tried to present the data in such a way that it would make sense to everyone and also give a lot of perspective and feedback around what was being detected and why. And so one of our core takeaways from it is that practitioners should not be looking for 100% on these evaluations, which goes without saying, but it is very helpful to have the data to prove that. And so this is one of the things that we were able to find is that when you look at the results, there are certain techniques that most vendors do not see. And that is not necessarily a bad thing because some of these techniques are very common. They are common in any enterprise, whether they're under attack or not. And so necessarily alerting on them is not useful. Now, in this latest round, we've seen a lot of beneficial changes come out of the results. For example, one of the things that we built was a cost calculator to look at the number of alerts that these tools are generating and say, okay, if you were to ingest this into your SIM with the following constraints, how much would it cost you just to bring in the alerts for this one attack or the second attack that they did or the third attack? And the costs range dramatically depending on the vendor because the number of alerts that they were generating ranged dramatically. Some vendors had over 1 million alerts that they were creating, others had under 10. And that is a very stark difference. And so, one of the things that the results enabled us to do was to go to the vendors and say, hey, what is going on here? Why are you alerting to this extent when that's going to be chaos for anyone who has to respond to them? And the feedback has been, we're fixing it. And so that to me has been a huge win, both for the MITRE team and for the results that we pulled, the analysis that we did from those results, is it shines a light on where the technology is currently at, where things like correlation are at, and where they are falling short. And it helps to reprioritize some of the work that the vendors are doing, especially at a time when I'm hearing more than ever, shockingly, from users that they're facing a larger number of alerts than they have in previous years.
All right, let's have some fun here. let's talk about alert volume and correlation. So your view of what types of alerts are getting generated and perhaps why certain vendors generate more alerts than others. Then maybe connected to that is the correlation piece, which traditionally has been rule-based, but I'm assuming there are some advancements with AI that might help with correlation that I would hope reduces the number of alerts. But do you get all the alerts that then generate a correlated alert? I don't know. Can kind of describe what's going on there, not naming any vendors in particular, but just kind of what's happening there from an alert perspective. Why so many from some, not that many from others, kind of the view on the tech that's making this all happen or not.
Yeah, so the MITRE team kind of organized the alerts that were coming in based on severity, and they mapped them all back. Keep in mind that alone is quite difficult to do because everybody has a different way of describing the alerts. Some use low, medium, high. Some use a number. Some use a number that is constrained from 0 to 100. Some have no constraints. It is all over the map. And also, some teams have alerts that are for an incident, and some have alerts that are for individual activity. So, say you see a technique and you alert on that technique, versus you see a series of techniques and you alert on that altogether. To coming back to the correlation conversation. Now, one of the things that I did as I was going through this data was I looked at it and I said, okay, I'm going to go back to the vendors and I'm going to ask them why their number of alerts are so high, because there has to be an explanation for this. And most of their explanations were that for the none, low, and medium alerts, those were really just informational. They're not something that you see in the main screen. They're just something that they surfaced for MITRE, which is fine. I think that that makes sense. And they're trying to give all of the context that they have of the situation, so it can be okay. Now, the challenge is that even once you remove the none, low, and medium alerts, there are vendors that still generate thousands of alerts. Thousands of alerts for what is a total of 100 substeps. It's way more alerts than there are steps in the attack. And so there's a couple of factors at play here. First off, we know historically there have been groups that have tried to game the system a little bit and try to detect on everything, which is part of the reason why MITRE introduced the volume metric, is to say, okay, here's a counterbalance to alerting on everything, where you can alert on everything, but your alert volume is obviously going to be a lot higher than it should be. Or you can alert on what's most important, and maybe you miss a little bit from the standpoint of visibility, but you manage the alert volume a little bit better. And so that's one of the reasons why this was introduced and has been very useful for that. Now, the reason that some vendors were able to get such a low number when it comes to alert volume is because they are doing correlation. They are looking at the information that comes in, and they are generating one or two, maybe three, depending on the number of, depending on the vendor, alerts that have all the context about an incident needed in that single alert. It is not just a indicator that you see in the platform somewhere. It is an indicator that is in the alert itself. That is very useful because it means that you don't have to do the manual correlation that you would otherwise have to do if you're looking at a bunch of disparate alerts and trying to say, okay, which ones are related to this attack and which ones aren't. And so that's the biggest difference in approach that different vendors take. Is one is, okay, let's look at these individual indicators. Maybe they go into a different view that's not the alerts. It's just the, hey, this was spotted and it might be malicious. Then there's the alerts view, which they may be populating in, and then there's the incidents view. And for those vendors that have a lower score, but also maintained visibility, they're able to do the correlation required to limit the number of alerts that they're presenting to the analyst, which is the ideal place to be, because we want to maximize visibility while also making it so that the analyst can actually get to that alert, which in some of these cases, they just wouldn't. There's no way that you're going to be going through 5,000 alerts in one day.
Right. So, yeah, based on my knowledge, which is antique at this point, there's the individual events that lead to a correlated alert, which in rudimentary fashion is you hit some threshold or some anomaly, and the collection of them triggers some rule. Are we moving anywhere toward a story-based alert, very, very much in line with what attack's trying to do, which is present the attack path and hopefully you follow up with the kill chain to prevent the path from executing successfully? Are we moving anywhere where correlation or some other form of analysis can actually say, here's the story, we see this path coming to fruition, and here's where the bad actor is on that path? Or are we too far away from that at this point?
Some vendors can, which is really exciting to see. Like, I think one of the underrated parts of these results is the fact that there are vendors in here that have under 10 alerts. That's really impressive. That's difficult to do. And they do it a couple of different ways. There's, of course, you can kind of take a look at all of the alerts that happen within a certain time frame and group those together if you think the time frame is close enough and the number of endpoints is few enough. There's also others that kind of take a graph-based approach and can look at the attack as it is basically traversing the graph and make sure that anything that's related to that path on the graph, they're bringing together into an alert. They can have some aspect of automating the investigation. If we look at like the ways that agentic AI is starting to be used on things like triage and taking those actions automatically for the analyst. So there's a couple of different ways that they can manage it. Some are using that, some are not. Some are relying on those static indicators that you mentioned, where it's like, okay, you can do correlation, but you do correlation. It is going to be manual. It's going to be a lot of work for you. And that is where we want to stay away. We don't want to still be stuck doing that, especially if in many cases these tools are generating more alerts, in part because they're doing more detection engineering work, but also in part because there's more attack surfaces that they need to, detection surfaces that they need to cover, all of that.
So I'm glad you touched on the response piece as well, and maybe that gets highlighted a little more in this next part, which is on the financial implications finding. Clearly, if you're spending a lot of time just clearing events or trying to correlate manually and trying to make some sense of it all beyond the correlation, that's a lot of wasted time. Hopefully you can move more toward the right, or the left, however you want to look at it, where you're a little more advanced with the tooling and the analysis. But then there's the response part, right? The investigation, the lock it down, clean up, respond, or change your protection and your other rules to detect better and maybe block better. How does all of that impact the cost, and maybe highlight some of the things that you found in that area as well?
So it's difficult to quantify that. That was kind of the gap that we really struggled with. What we quantified specifically was the cost of ingest into the SIM, because I know from the inquiries that I get, that's very top of mind for CISOs right now, especially as they evaluate their security data management strategy. But
Is that a big number? Sorry to pause
sorry,
you. Is that a big number? I'm
a big
surprised that data ingestion in this. I guess maybe not surprised, but
data ingestion in the SIM is so expensive.
is it?
It's wild. You have to be very cognizant of what you're
Okay.
bringing into the sim and how. It's like one of the biggest questions and consistent questions that I get. And it's a huge driver for a lot of the changes happening in the sim market right now. And so that's part of the reason why we structured it around that, was like, okay, you're worried about your sim costs. Here's what you're going to be dealing with from this. And that's just, I mean, this was just for 3 attacks. This was not
Right.
for like attacks on thousands of endpoints or thousands of attacks. So, but yeah, I could talk all day about the challenges in the sim market and sim cost.
Maybe we'll have to do that at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for this in particular, though, what
Yeah.
what are some of the highlights? I guess, and are there organizations that don't know they have a cost issue? They just kind of roll with it and accept that that's what it is because it's what we bought, and I don't know. I'm still a
With
bit
the
shocked, I
EDR,
guess.
I think it
Yeah,
depends a lot on whether or not you choose to bring these alerts into the SIM, right? Many will just work out of their EDR and not necessarily bring it into the SIM, because if you're going to bring it into the SIM, especially if you're a smaller business, that requires more resources, and it's going to be harder to manage that. And also, like, doing the correlation itself it requires a lot of manual work if you're bringing it into the SIM. So there's trade-offs. Larger enterprises very well might, especially because they want to do correlation with additional sources, unless they're kind of going the XDR route. Now, but to your point, even though the quantification that we did is only specific to the ingest into the SIM, there's a lot of other aspects of this that are very top of mind for practitioners, especially around analyst experience, which is security analysts' perception of the tools and technologies that they work with. That is dramatically affected when you have so many alerts coming in, because it leads to burnout. And at the end of the day, we can't lose any more security staff than we already are, either to security vendors or to different parts of tech. And so we need to find ways to manage that a little bit more effectively. And I see CISOs really prioritizing analyst experience as a part of their yearly goals, because they want to be able to train and build the staff more effectively. Now, if you're flooding them with 5,000 alerts that are kind of boring to go in, evaluate, and figure out if they're right or wrong, they're not going to be enjoying their jobs. They're not going to be contributing effectively to the work. And it's going to be a big waste of their time on top of it, and a waste of your resources. So there's a lot of reasons why, beyond the initial upfront cost of ingest, that you need to be careful with how you approach using some of these tools. The other factor here, too, is it does leave the analysts with a bit of a feeling of a lack of control, because for a lot of EDRs, we talked about how it's a black box. You don't necessarily, beyond tuning, and maybe trying to deprecate a detection, you don't have a ton of control over the alerts and the rules that are being brought into the system. The vendor typically has that control. And so it means that you are in a bit of a shared responsibility model with the vendor for creating detections and also making sure that the detections that are being created are actually going to be beneficial and lead to better quality alerts.
So this just popped in my head, because it'd be easy to blame the vendors for, for a lot of this stuff. But I'm wondering, do you see security teams, ops teams, analysts setting stuff up incorrectly that makes it worse for them? Are there things we need to do from an understanding education perspective to really get the most out of our SIM in a way that matters?
So there's two different sides to this. First off, all of the tools that were in the MITRE ATT&CK evaluations were set up by the vendors. So if anybody is going to be held responsible for the outcome of that, it's going to be the vendors. But to your point, there is, especially if we look at the SIM, a
Best case,
mentality.
then, I guess.
Yeah, there is a mentality of ingest everything and let's just like throw it in there. There's pressure from other groups within the organization to put additional data in and create dashboards for them because it's just considered the data store in the enterprise. And so there's a lot of motivation for practitioners to start ingesting a lot of data. In many cases, they also will ingest that data because they're like, we'll ingest it now, we'll build detections later. I can tell you from experience, those detections are not going to get built later. You're just going to be ingesting data and not seeing very positive outcomes on it, because you should be making decisions about what data you ingest based on what data you need for certain detections. As part of the detection engineering research that we've done, the key takeaway is everything comes back to the quality of the detection and to the work that you're doing building the detection. In previous years, we've had this focus on, okay, let's close the ticket, right? That focus has led us down the path where we struggle to make sure detections are up to date. We struggle to make sure that we even understand the scope of detections that we have. We struggle with analyst burnout. And if we refocus the role of the SOC into creating better quality detections, then we can start to have better quality outcomes. And that starts with knowing what data you're bringing in and making informed decisions on that data based on the detections that you need to create.
As we come close to the end, not quite, but getting there, I wanted the last point in the key findings is kind of around the vendor claims. And I don't necessarily want to make this about beating up any vendors, but I want to look at this from an analyst, practitioner, security leader perspective as they're trying to select a tool for their organization, get the most out of the tool that they've selected, run their team effectively without burnout. What are some of the discrepancies you saw or uncovered in the claims area that maybe should get teams to look differently at how they approach selecting and implementing and using a SIM, and I guess in the bigger picture of their operations in general too?
Yeah, and I totally agree. Definitely don't want to be just targeting on the vendors here. There are some vendors that did really, really well in this evaluation. It's definitely worth looking at the full list to see what all their capabilities are, because it gives you a lot of interesting data on the disparities too between the vendors. But when it comes to evaluating some of the claims, we have this every year, right? Every year, vendors try to take the results and turn them into marketing material, which is their prerogative. And I feel for them because that's not an easy task to do. But unfortunately, that often leads to things like 100% performance in the evaluations from us vendor and things like that. And so, to be honest, I would just be very skeptical of any results from any vendor and the way that they are portraying those results, because it is based around which metric is most important to them or conveys their success most completely. And that's just the reality of it, right? That's nothing against the vendors. Vendors got a vendor and all of that. but it is misleading to a analyst or a practitioner who may want to have a bigger picture around where the pros and cons are of using a particular tool. So I'd look for non-biased reviews and perspectives on it, first off, which is why we do the research, but also to look at the results from MITRE yourself directly, to look at the screenshots that they provide, because they provide screenshots of all of the tools, to look at the alert volume, to look at the coverage that each vendor had, to look at the background noise that they were able to spot or not spot, which is really another interesting addition. And to, if you do want to use MITRE ATT&CK evaluations in this way, to make an informed decision based on far more than just looking at a vendor blog post that is ultimately just trying to paint their technology in the best light, because that's their job.
Yeah, good stuff. And maybe let's wrap with this. Let's speak to the CISOs. I know you get to have a lot of fun conversations with them. Not looking for you to disclose anything, but any conversations or aha moments when you're speaking with the CISO community about their programs, not necessarily around the analysis and research you did and the findings you have, but maybe that do connect. So they're talking about these things, and oh my gosh, there is a line there. I think you touched on one or two of them already, but is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is this all ties into detection engineering. It's something that we've talked about a lot the past 2 years. It's something that we've seen happening in the industry quite a bit, is this shift from security operations being much more of a kind of waterfall function to moving to detection engineering and having more of a software development style approach, not necessarily detection as code, some do, but really more of a focus on how can we continuously deliver high quality detections. And the MITRE ATT&CK evaluations, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, those are all a part of it, since the MITRE ATT&CK framework serves as that common language and is frequently used to reference what detections are doing and to help understand detection coverage. But also the evaluations, because especially for any detection engineers, it's great for them to be able to go through the MITRE ATT&CK results and see what is being detected and why. And you can kind of do a little reverse engineering of like, why did the vendor choose not to detect or didn't see this particular technique? That was something from the previous evaluations that we really called out, was to what we talked about earlier. Certain vendors aren't seeing certain things, and that's intentional because it's just wasteful for them to be collecting that information. That's the type of thing that can be really informational to detection engineers as they do their research. It also gives you an opportunity to look and say, okay, what are the gaps in this particular technology? Perhaps it's time for us to build a detection rule to cover that gap that we found in the MITRE ATT&CK evaluations, because that's actually much more relevant to our business than it is to maybe all of that vendor's other customers. So it's an opportunity to see inside the black box and get a perspective of where gaps might be and determine if those gaps are acceptable for you and your team.
Super cool. And you know what else is cool is my co-founder Marco's not here to stop me asking one more question, because I always have one more. You did such a good job on the detection piece. I know you look a lot at the response and the source space as well. How does this impacting teams' ability to respond properly and with automation and orchestration as well? And I'm just thinking, if you're not seeing the data and you might need that context in a investigation and response, is some of this, how's that all connecting on the response side?
Yeah, so I love this question, because one of the things, like, we frame our detection engineering research as detection and response engineering very intentionally, because one of the things that I think is an oversight, typically caused by the fact that a lot of the detection technologies were built separately from the response technologies. Like, most SOARs were standalone and then got acquired, right, by the detection technologies. And so it leaves this gap for security teams where they're building detections and they're building response playbooks. But in reality, we need to be linking every detection to a response playbook to add additional context in. And so it would ideally be a cohesive flow between detection. Here's the detection that you built, and here are the response playbooks that need to trigger as part of that detection. And MITRE ATT&CK supports this in a couple of different ways, actually. They have recommendations built into the framework that talk about like defense procedures and things that you should be looking for. But also, it's just an effective way, coming back to that, treating it as a common language to say, okay, if we see this particular technique, we most often need to gather additional context around this process. And so we're going to automatically pull that with the SOAR playbook. So it all links together in a really important way. And ideally, if you have the capacity, building any SOAR playbooks should be a part of your detection engineering lifecycle as well, and should follow a very similar path.
Excellent advice. I could talk to you for hours about this, Allie. It's always fun. Always
Very
fun.
fun. Thank you for having me.
I get to nerd out a bit here on this.
Me too.
So with that, we'll let people kind of ruminate a bit. I have the link to your initial post, which prompted this conversation. It has a number of links in it to the calculation tool and the report and other things. So I'll include that for folks to nibble on. And of course, I invite everybody to stay tuned for more Redefining Cybersecurity here, and subscribe, share with your friends and enemies. Allie, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Keep well. Hopefully we'll see you on the conference circuit somehow, somewhere soon.
Definitely.
And you're always welcome back as you uncover new things that are fun and exciting to talk about, which you
Thank you
often
so
do.
much.
So. All
Thanks for
right.
having
Thanks
me.
a million. Thanks, everybody.
This is a special announcement. We are heading to RSA conference in San Francisco for our 11th years of coverage, April 28, May 1st.
And as always, we're bringing you keynotes, conversations with organizers, speakers, industry leaders, plus the latest insights from the world of cybersecurity.
And we'll reconnect with old friends, meet new ones, and of course, we want you and your company to join us.
We have a few spots left for full sponsorship and our on-location briefings. You can book yours now at itspmagazine.com/RSAC.
We're going.
And you're coming with us.